Welcome to the Mailtime Podcast. I am joined today by Liel Leibovitz. He is the editor-at-large at Tablet Magazine. Liel, thanks for taking the time.
What a pleasure. Hello.
So, right shortly before we came on air, Ben Shapiro just eviscerated Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, and Kevin Roberts' response to the whole brouhaha. What's your take on it?
As always, this is the silliest, least interesting things anyone could say. Ben Shapiro is brilliant and said what needed to be said. I think his evisceration of Tucker and Fuentes said precisely or hit precisely the note that needed to be hit, because the thing that upsets me the most, to be perfectly honest, and I kind of got a whiff of it from Ben's comments too, it's really not about the Jews. Let's be honest here. Jews are, 2% of the American population. Whatever, man. We faced worse. We're going to be fine. We always are. Or we go with God. This is good. What's really upsetting about this is the notion that this so-called woke right is so profoundly and fundamentally anti-American. This is a kind of defeatist, loserly stance that stands against everything that we believe, that stands with our enemies, that stands with, all of the America haters. This is the one thing that, if you believe that kind of sitting and giving a nice fawning interview to the president of Iran, but then eviscerating the, gentleman from Texas, the Republican senator from the great state of Texas, is in some way MAGA or America First, you're out of your mind. These people are America haters. And here's the thing. They could say whatever they want to say. They're Obama in a bow tie. We don't want any more of that. We've had enough of that. We want to be done with that. I don't care if you call yourself a leftist or a, woke rightist. You ain't right.
And I was going back and forth with Dumasani Washington on Twitter, or X, I should say, and it was fascinating to me because it wasn't even a hypothetical about what would Heritage say if Fuentes went after a different minority group, say African Americans. He does that all the time. So he's an open racist. So just the idea that you would even insinuate that you're now joining with him or allowing him into the discussion was outright crazy. But for whatever reason, they're just losing their minds about the Jews.
Look, I think it's a moment of tremendous clarity. And I want to be kind of like cautious and slow. The one thing we don't want to do, which is the one thing that the left does all the time, is basically stand and demand all kinds of denunciations and rebukes and ideological litmus tests and purities. That to me is a sort of, it's profoundly un-American, but it's also definitely not what anyone who considers themselves conservative ought to do. That having been said, I think what we're looking at is a really clarifying moment that allows people to have a real discussion over a question that remains very open, which is, what is MAGA, or by a larger extension, what is American conservatism in the year 2025? Because the question, crazy as it may sound or seem, has never really been put forward to any real voters. Donald Trump won on the force of Donald Trump's singular historical personality. Donald Trump never actually sat down and said, okay, well, look, here are the principle of MAGA faith, and here are the disciples that will take us forward in the nation. As a result, we're having this crazy conversation. I am very, very, very willing to forgive and forget anyone from our camp who kind of takes a stumble, takes a misstep, makes kind of weird statement in support of something or someone they shouldn't have had. And then when kind of explained the magnitude of the error, says, oh my God, no, that is not at all what I thought I was saying or doing. It appears from the last, call it 48 or 72 hours in the annals of the Heritage Institution, of the Heritage Foundation, that Heritage is truly having a kind of come to Jesus moment and trying to kind of understand and reassess and do some real kind of teshuvah and not just PR damage control. I really hope that's the case, because that's the conversation I want to have. Not just, oh, we're conservatives, we fight to own the libs, but what is it that we're seeking to conserve? And the answer isn't pro-Russia, anti-Jewish,
right.
pro-loser, anti-America. The answer is the opposite.
But how do you balance standing true to principle with what you described as a litmus test? Because I would say that saying that we don't want to associate or have people that are openly uh, anti-Semitic making decisions, I don't think that's necessarily a litmus test. I think you're just simply saying that this person is morally corrupted because they're able to come to such uh, to the conclusion of such irrational hatred. But some would say, "Oh, that's a litmus test." I don't know.
No, no,
Like,
that's.
how do you
Thank you for
define
that
that?
question, because it's totally not what I meant. What I meant is, look, there are people who you look at and understand right away. Here is a filthy freaking anti-Semite. You look at Tucker Carlson. There could be no two ways about it. Hey, man, you are a hateful person, and your head should roll, metaphorically speaking or figuratively speaking, because you're a hater of Jews, of liberty, and of America. Nick Fuentes very much fits into that camp. But I think that aside, and thankfully, I think that camp is really small and really vile and really crazy. You could tell it by its crazy, right? You listen to Candace
Correct.
Owens, you're like, you're an insane person. You listen to the Tucker like cackle. You understand that's a crazy person you're talking to. Fuentes, they're not well balanced. But then I think there's a whole host of humans. There's a whole kind of universe of people trying to figure the way out in the world. My personal approach, and it's not an approach that some of my beloved friends and true kind of soulmates share, is rather than saying, "Oh my God, how could you have come out in support of XYZ?" is to be, if you will, a lot more Chabad about it and be like, "Hey man, let's have a l'chaim. Let's talk. Let me explain to you why it is that I think Tucker is an America hating freak, or that you should never ever defend Fuentes, etc., etc." Now, if you choose to willfully maintain your willful ignorance, not get it, and continue to support these haters, even after we've engaged in this thing, hey man, that's your own choice. You could choose to corrupt your own soul. There's nothing I could do to help. But I think a lot of people, and again, the last hours in the life of the Heritage Foundation are a good testament to this, would be very receptive. And they would say, oh, now that we actually frame the conversation, not in terms of how dare you, kind of cross this line, or how dare you support the person who doesn't support 100% of the thing that we support, because all of us need to walk a line and, aligned in one, one neat file. People will say like, oh no, I totally understand what you said. And I want to be on the right camp, in the right camp. And so I'm just going to kind of course correct. I think you'll be seeing more and more and more of that. And I'm very optimistic.
So take, for example, someone like Megyn Kelly, right? I don't know anyone in this who's making a serious intellectual case, and I've written about this. I don't know anyone that was trying to say that she's intentionally a terrible person,
Sure.
and forget the trolls on X, right? I thought that it was strange that she would insist on Tucker and Candace, and then even bringing Anna Kasparian on her show as some sort
Huh?
of real thinker. She referred to Max Blumenthal as a quote unquote journalist. But the response was very much a straw man response, saying, "Oh, you want me to block out my dear friend of 20 years? How dare you say that?" And I don't know that anybody was saying that to her. So how do you deal with having that, as you say, Chabad approach and trying to say, I think you might misunderstand this, with being legitimately troubled about the normalization of some insane ideas, like, for example, Daryl Cooper?
I think this is a tremendous question that would require a whole lot of parsing as time goes by, but I think it comes down to the same element, or the same principle, which is the principle of real and honest conversation. Look, you may not like Matt Walsh. You may not like Matt Walsh's no enemies on the right principle. But if you examine it from a critical distance, Matt Walsh is saying something that is extremely poignant. He's saying, look, man, one side, in this kind of divide, one side is filled with people who have some ideas that I disagree with, maybe even vehemently. The other just murdered my friend. The other is threatening to kill my children, literally threatening to kill my children. My wife and I were going out to dinner in a restaurant here in New York City, where we sadly, having made some poor life choices, still live till this day.
Wow, that's
Uh,
terrible.
we were having a kind of normal human conversation, and the couple next to us was repeatedly and loudly making disparaging comments. And when we finally got up to leave, they were sort of like, clapping and saying, "Oh, Trumpies go home." Um, I think there's a real point in wanting to preserve a coalition that focuses on what matters most. And what matters most is dismantling these animals on the left who are really trying to destroy America. That having been said, let's go back to the example of Megyn Kelly. Look, Megyn Kelly said some things that I disagree with vehemently. However, look at the reaction to Megyn Kelly. It was never, "Hey, let's go have Joel Linton talk. Let's sit. Let's respect the fact that actually your first normal instinct is to defend your friends." It was always, "Oh my God, how dare you?" Or "We always knew you were not a true friend." Or "You need to recant or else."
Wait a sec. You
I don't
have
like that.
the crazy people said that. I'll say I sent her a few messages. She doesn't remember that I was on her show 10 years ago, and I tried to do it. But I mean, again, you're always going to have insane people say things on the internet. That's a feature, not a bug of the internet.
Correct, but I
But I
think
don't.
the tenor of the conversation for the most part, and again, these things are very difficult to sort of parse because you could say, for every example each one of us brings, the other could say,
Right.
"But look, there are other people who did
Sure.
X, Y, Z." I think as we kind of try to move ourselves as a camp towards one direction, you have two choices here, and I think you're seeing people break. Good people, well-intentioned people, right down the line. There are some people that say, "Hey, man, Liel, shut up. You're an idiot." If someone cannot see anti-Semitism, America hatred for what it is, that person's lost. That person has a mind virus. They're never coming back. That is a legitimate position. My position is this is a very confusing time with a lot of moving parts, with a lot of ideas that are not necessarily very clear to a lot of people, with a lot of personal friendships and relationships shifting. Pile on as much love as you can until you're 100% certain that a person is making a mindful, willful choice to stand with the anti-America crowd. Once you see that, you could say, "Hey, I tried. There's nothing I could do to help you. I'm sorry, we're going to have this fight." But until that moment comes, I really want big Mashiach energy. I want as much kind of engagement as is possible. And I also want to, again, take this conversation away from the, "How dare you support XYZ?"
Of course.
Take this conversation to the actual great question is, what is it that we conservatives are concerned? And the answer is always two things: America and Hashem. There's not a third, quotient.
And you should also add that the part of what was so troubling about what Kevin Roberts said, and even what Fuentes and Tucker have been promoting, is they just kept saying that America was built by Christians, and they're trying to basically go after anyone who's not Christian. And that's something that's also deeply troubling and un-American.
Correct.
So it's
and,
like
and, and,
that's
and
the feat.
historically false. I mean, it was built
Correct.
by people, sure, who had some affinity with Christianity, though, historically speaking, more deist than sort of faithful uh, believers, and who went to great lengths to make sure that this country was not founded as a Christian nation, a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, any other nation, but precisely as a kind of great experiment in human liberty that it is.
Correct. But I think this tension that we're seeing here about kind of, let's say, the aggressive love or the aggressive disdain, I don't want to say hatred, but disdain, is we see that in a number of different arenas, including the mayoral race. So I've been very loud in the last week and a half or so about Angela Buchdahl not condemning Mamdani until this past Shabbos night. And you see there's kind of been this hesitation from some leaders. Listen, if you want to say, hey, the focus has to be on Mamdani, I agree with that as a central problem in identifying this person who is in bed with all sorts of anti-American creatures and is targeting the one and only Jewish state. But for me, there's also this bigger issue, which is the wokeism that's been promoted in the name of religion in many places of prayer. And it's hard because, yeah, you want to say we have one enemy, you have one thing, which is to say, make sure that Zohran Mamdani is not the mayor of New York, because that's a big problem. But at the same time, you have people who are supposed to be in your camp who are not actually promoting the ideas that advance our community in the proper way, right? So I think that there's that inherent tension. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but it's something that I've noticed.
Yeah, although I think this tension is frankly quite small. Look, good on Angela Buchdahl that she finally got around to talking some sense this Shabbos. But frankly, I don't care. Because Angela Buchdahl has for a very long time been promoting an inherently foundationally dishonest message, right? She has been saying, well, I don't mix politics in the pulpit. I can't, I'm neither denouncing, not denouncing. I'm just kind of elevating, kind of hovering above this all. Angela Buchdahl spent the entirety of 2023 rehashing Biden administration anti-BB talking points, masquerading as sermons on, truth, beauty, and social justice. To say that she has been above the political fray is a joke. It's a joke with anyone with
Correct.
any real kind of understanding of politics. Even the smallest understanding of politics understands that she has been a political player, that it took her this long, and that it took huge kind of, public outrage, and I assume, demands or exhortations from people, including congregants, including quite likely board members or other communal players. That's just proof of cowardice, not courage. So, these people, our so-called leaders, don't really matter to me, because the fact that we even have, and we're speaking here a day before the election, the fact that Mamdani is even a possibility shows the absolute and utter and unforgivable failure of the entirety of the organized American Jewish community, all of which now has to do a real cheshbon nefesh, and many people in that structure ought to no longer remain in their positions of power and influence come Wednesday, no matter what happens in Tuesday's
I mean,
election.
even the fact that Kathy Hochul came out and endorsed him,
Right.
right? So JCRC, UJA, they all have open channels of communication, I'm assuming, with her. So how did you get to the
Oh,
point
not just
where,
that. Look, the
yeah,
JCRC is a classic example. I recall, and it is only, my deepest commitment to doing my best to not foster more division in the Jewish community than is absolutely necessary. Will I not mention the person's name? But I recall very clearly having a conversation with a very, very senior person in the JCRC some years ago during the de Blasio administration, saying, what is it that you are doing? Because we are seeing, an unbelievable uptick in attacks against Jews who look like me, with yarmulke beards like you too, and you are seemingly totally non-present. And the response I got, well, you don't understand. Politics is a complicated game. We're working behind the scenes. We have influence, da 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 da. At the same time, hey, AOC, welcome to a great big JCRC sponsored breakfast conversation. Literally every hateful politician in New York State, if that politician was a Democrat, and extra points if that politician was a woman of color or some other nonsense, DEI code word, got a bear hug from the JCRC. I don't recall any politician, and especially not President Trump, greatest friend and supporter of religious liberties in this country in a very long time, getting anything but a nod. These organizations are not, they're not innocent bystanders of this thing. They're very much part of the problem. They made a lot of this possible. And to see them now being like, oh, wow, could you believe? Yes, I could believe, Zohran Mamdani, you helped make it possible. You want to know what the problem is? The problem is you.
yeah. So first, I survived one of these woke brainwashing institutions in high school. I went to one of them, so I know the language. And when I first wrote about Angela Buchdahl, I got tons of messages saying that it's a shame that I'm attacking the first Korean
Of course.
American rabbi. And I'm just in shock. I said, I don't even care. I don't care if she's Mexican American. I don't care if she's Japanese American, Korean American, Australian. I don't care. Like, why is that even relevant? But they just keep hammering it, hammering it, hammering it. And then, of course, they use that when she's on CBS, when she is at the White House with Obama and with Biden. And it's unbelievable. It's not even a discussion about the ideas. But when we talk, I know you say you don't care because you know, how do we rescue the Jewish community from the DEI infiltration and this
Well,
incessant focus on appealing to that hard left multicultural idea?
man, there are two ways to go about it. The sort of, shall we say, hardened, realistic,
Well, subscribe to Tablet, right?
Subscribe to Tablet, listen to Dan Mail, do
Uh,
do 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 all the right things. But look, one way to kind of approach a question is to say, hey, hopefully we're sort of living in the tail end of this national collective nightmare. We have seen how poorly adhering to that particular worldview could go. We have seen the monstrous results of the last 2 years. We have seen the complete capture of our institutions by these, filthy Jew-hating animals. Therefore, it is less and less likely that more and more Jews will continue to support these lunatic ideas. And you're seeing this in all kinds of stats, including the thankfully rising numbers of Jews who support the Republican Party. I have a kind of a different, if you will, because I love the premise of your question about how dare you not support Angela Bogdal because she's the first Korean female rabbi. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, and a lot of it I think came to light after that ridiculous quote unquote rabbis for Mamdani ad that we were afflicted with the other day, including of course the first it's transgendered rabbi, etc. I think what we're seeing is a beginning of understanding, and this is kind of metaphysical, but I think beautiful and profound, of the whole idea of rabbi. Look, our idea of rabbi, by which I mean the Jewish idea of rabbi, is you want to be called that. Well, you have to earn it, and you earn it by actually serving as a knowledgeable leader of a community of people who accept you as their rabbi. I told you before, I'm currently pursuing my smicha, my rabbinic ordination, and it is my great joy and aim to receive this certificate and then place it deep down in a drawer and never, ever, ever talk about it or mention it or use it again, because I understand that having a piece of paper makes me precisely nothing. Having great amount of knowledge, having great amount of respect that comes from other people that is earned is what gives you the title rabbi. I think you're kind of seeing the split. I think more and more and more Jews and more Americans understand that these mutually accrediting mediocrities who went to all these horrible DEI factories and now stand up and demand respect because I have a master's degree from this and that university, therefore you must call me X and Y, or even more nefarious, well, I belong to the right kind of bingo category of supposedly aggrieved minority. Therefore that gives me some kind of great authority. All that is nonsense. The only thing that matters is the content of your character. And if you have spent years and years and years and years playing petty politics from the pulpit and having very little to say about actual ideas, and if you ran synagogues that allow other members of the clergy to attack other Jews or attack other Jewish denominations or attack basic Jewish principles, well, man, you can call yourself whatever you want, but a rabbi you ain't.
It reminds me of the great Dennis Pragerism, right? When people would call and have some of these crazy ideas, and he'd say, "Where'd you go to grad school?"
Right.
And I say, "How'd you know I went to grad school?" It's like,
exactly
only
right.
someone that went to grad school could say something so stupid.
That's right.
I mean, what do you think it is about? And fortunately for everyone else, unfortunately for me, I went through 2 years of sermons of the Central Synagogue just to understand what was going on. Yeah, I did. What's this obsession with trying to change definitions? How come it can't be that there's a traditional Jewish understanding of what, the creation story, but we don't agree with that, and we're just going to come up with our own thing and call it that? Why do they have to say that this is the new why do they have to denounce every other understanding of a traditional definition? And this is, I guess, in the larger DEI picture, not, to zoom out from one place. But why do they have to change definitions?
That's an amazing question, Dan, really, and one that I wish we had, sort of like 6 hours to just kind of sit and examine, because you want to be fair, and I suppose the fair answer would be toying with definitions, questioning definitions, challenging definitions is very much in the Jewish DNA. In fact, some of our greatest rabbinic minds throughout the centuries have done precisely this, and have taken real liberties, sometimes stunning liberties, with accounts. That is what makes the religion so incredibly vibrant. That's not my problem. My problem is different. My problem is that if you look at these movements, at the Reform movement and also its offshoot, the conservative movement, you understand very well that these are two denominations. By the way, denominations itself being about the most goyish thing you could ever.
No, it's fun. It's fundamentally anti-Jewish. The conservative, correct, I think, got the title because they served shrimp
but
at
then
the reform movement in the 1883, I believe.
right, but then these movements played a very distinct role in a certain historical setting. Hey, I'm being very overly general, but like Jews came to America, they had to make a living somehow. A lot of them were kind of like store owners or peddlers or whatever. Sunday was church day. People needed to make a living, and so Saturday had to be compromised in some way. These movements came in America to sort of give an answer to that. All that is good and well. However, now that that type of vibe has outlived its historical usefulness, what makes you, quote unquote, a reform Jew? What makes you a quote unquote conservative Jew? I think that question is becoming independent of the sort of very specific sociological underpinnings out of which these movements were born, none of which are relevant any longer in America in 2025. That question theologically is almost impossible to answer, because the more you think about it truthfully, the more you realize there are no 7 or 10 or even 3 Judaisms. There's one Judaism, there's one halacha, there's one Mishnah, there's one Gemara, out of which a million different interpretations. But if you're not willing to accept the sort of rootedness in the core Jewish truth, like, hey man, you can call yourself whatever you want, but you're sort of like tangential to the sort of larger Jewish story. That is a really difficult thing for anyone to accept, right? I mean,
there's two quotes from my Rabbi Lieberman, in high school. I remember him saying them. He said, just because a Jew has an idea, it doesn't make it a Jewish idea, right?
That's
There's
right.
principles of like kind of what the contours are of Judaism. And the other was when people would go to my brainwashing high school and they would say, oh, well, this is authentic pluralism. Look at all this. And he goes, well, if you want to see pluralism, just go to Brooklyn.
Right.
You can see all the different hats, you see the different jackets, you see everything, and you're just actually being a bigot, and you're saying that, oh, this person with a beard, they must think the exact same thing.
There are Satmars, there are Bobovers,
why is that not pluralistic?
Even more profound than that. If you want to see true pluralism, I would say go to Israel, in which one of the most beautiful things when I'm there, I daven in a shul in Tel Aviv that my great-grandfather helped start, called Bet El Synagogue, now rechristened as Tel Aviv International Synagogue, because it's mostly American and French Jews. But the beautiful thing that you see, everyone comes in on, Friday, say at 6 or 7 p.m. Everyone's dressed, it's Israel, so jeans and a white T-shirt, which passes for the kind of ceremonious garb. And once Kabbalat Shabbat is over, half the people go home to have Shabbos dinner, study some Torah, and live, Shomer Shabbos observant life. Half the people are going to a bar, which is literally across the street from the shul, and that's not a problem for anyone. We all have the same tradition. We all choose to come at it from different direction, but no one comes and says, well, no, I don't like that thing that you said, therefore I'm going to change this liturgy, claim that the idea is truly not about the idea, and that the whole religion is about, being nice to, women of color. That's simply not true.
Yeah, it's absolutely obscene. You're bringing Israel in here. I want to transition a little bit just to some foreign policy before I let you go. Yeah, no. So, what is your take on the American-Israel relationship in the sense of the critique that Israel is some sort of vassal state, and the pushback we're seeing from certainly the Israeli right or center right, about Trump's insistence on first of all on the ceasefire and also on certain behaviors? I'll start just by saying that as an American, I think that it's completely appropriate for Trump to put forward America's interests, and I think that Israel's kind of made its bed in its pretty high dependence on American support, and whether that's weaponry or at the UN or in other places. And I think it's totally fair for Trump to assert those demands. You might not like it, but it's kind of it's the bed that Israel made. So do you agree with me? Disagree?
Oh, look, I more than agree. I agree enthusiastically. For my sins, I have the misfortune of writing all sorts of pieces that make people very unhappy. I don't think I've ever written a more controversial piece than the piece written with my colleague Jake Siegel, published in July of 2023. The date here obviously matters a lot, which basically said, guys, it is time to end the misguided disaster known as U.S. foreign aid to Israel. First of all, because there is no such thing as U.S. foreign aid to Israel. It's not a gimme or handout. It is a backdoor subsidy to American weapons manufacturers. None of these dollars leave the United States of America. Second of all, that agreement serves America much better than it serves Israel, because America gets pennies on the dollar, access to some of the greatest minds and technologies that come out of Israel, including cybersecurity, etc. But third of all, and this is no surprise there, very much or in large part the doing of Barack Obama, that dramatically expanded the framework of this agreement. This is basically the sort of cudgel with which people could come and say, you see, we give Israel $3.1 billion. Therefore, it is clear that we're not America first. We're just serving the Israeli interests. We're sort of, intertwined with them, and they don't even have the gratitude to say da 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 da. I think if the Israelis had more sense than sadly they're currently displaying, they would come and say, guys, let's keep it very friendly, very coordinated, but very simple. We would love some kind of priority in, ordering some of those F-35s or whatever it is that we need. But other than that, it should just be a classic trade-off, under which we totally understand that frequently the American president will insist on policies or ideas that serve America's foreign interests. The Israeli prime minister will insist on some ideas or timelines or precepts that serve the Israeli national security interests. And because these interests are foundationally, fundamentally, and profoundly aligned, we may have little quibbles here and there, but we would never, at least, in an ideal situation, not under, a Democrat president, but we would never really have a misunderstanding or a clash that we cannot address. I think it starts from asserting that mutual respect, but overall independence, which has been a crying shame of the last 30 or 40 odd years.
But so you mentioned Obama, and as much as I love ripping on Obama and ripping on Biden, I really blame this on the Israelis. I mean, they're the ones who are asking for it, who are accepting it, who have pushed it, who are informing people what they need. Like at some point, it's not. If it brings me back to the beginning of the war, when there was tons of shortage of equipment, and people had actually reached out to different senators asking them for help from America, asking American senators if they could help under the Lend-Lease program to give equipment and supplies to Israel. And the senators said, we're on board. Great. Then they call the Ministry of Defense in Israel and oh, no, we don't need anything. So what are you supposed to do?
You were more vocal and insightful on that issue in real time than pretty much everyone else I know. I think it shows you how deep the problem goes. But look, why are we talking about these highfalutin things? Just this morning, and I'm sure you've read about this, because this is truly one of the most unbelievable stories, and sometimes you just have to stop and kind of gawk at the magnificence and the terrible nature of the news coming out of Israel. As I'm sure you know, the Army's chief lawyer was arrested after she basically concocted a whole blood libel against Israeli soldiers who were guarding Nukhba, Hamas, filthy animal terrorists in a highly secure prison. The soldiers were wrongfully accused of sexual abuse that none of the medical reports hold, true. The Army's own chief lawyer leaked the allegations to the media, denied it, ran a cover-up, and when she was finally busted, and this is the kind of mind-blowing thing, staged a suicide attempt, left behind a suicide note, had the police search for her simply so she could go and throw her own cell phone into the sea, into the Mediterranean, so she could destroy all the evidence used against her. She's a general. She's now under arrest, the highest ranking Israeli officer ever to be placed under arrest. Think about this. Think about the Army's own top lawyer trying to concoct a story accusing IDF soldiers wrongfully of raping a Palestinian terrorist in prison simply to exert pressure against the prime minister, simply to play dirty politics, simply to weaken the country from within. That's what we're dealing with in Israel. It's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, it's horrible. And again, I actually want to just talk about this for 1 second because I put something out saying, based on my sources and people I know that were in State Teman, it's certainly, as I said, it's no Camp Ramah. Okay, I don't think that any of us would want to go hang out there. And certainly, some pretty bad things happened. But again, that's very different than saying, in the context of a war. Remember, days, weeks, months after October 7th, you have people that are dragged out of their houses, haven't seen their wives and kids in weeks or months, and they are now guarding these people who have killed 10 to 15 Jews in their beds. And those are the people that are being incarcerated there, okay?
Right.
So I'm not feeling bad for any of them. I'm not, but the like you said, it's just absolutely crazy that now the head investigator lied about it. That's what's crazy. She was tasked with investigating it and lied. So now but it's actually fed the conspiracy theorists on many sides. It's very,
As
very
Prime Minister
challenging.
Netanyahu called it, it is probably the greatest sort of image related suicide bombing against Israel in the history of this nation. But look, I think it kind of lends itself to a much larger set of questions, which Israel now needs to deal with and hasn't even come close to doing. One example is this: why are you holding prisoners incarcerated? If you say, well, the goal is to have a trial, a trial, by definition, if you want it to be a fair trial, has to assume the possibility of innocence, right? That's why you put people on trial. Well, you're either found guilty and punished or found innocent and let go. These are people who we know by their own accounts, not just testimonials, but like actual GoPro videos, are filthy predatory animals. These people should be dead. These people should be executed right away and save everyone the trouble. But that requires Israel to sort of have a real shift in the way it deals with the problem around. It's my greatest kind of lament. And again, I don't want this to sound like an unhinged criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he deserves a lot of credit for handling a lot of crises in a very sort of nuanced and tactful way. Destroying Hezbollah is no small achievement. Kind of annihilating much of Iran's nuclear capabilities in 12 days is astonishing. But I think that it is a crying shame that we are now 2 years after October 7th, back in a position where the most likely outcome of everything would be some variation on what came before. I think it is high time for Israel to understand that the only two currencies in this neighborhood are land and humiliation. And if you're attacked, the only response is to say, I'm sorry, I didn't want any of this. You chose to do this on the morning of the 7th. Therefore, there is no more Gaza, and we are sitting on the Litani River up north. Next time you do it, we will sit in the Shuf Mountains, and we will advance all the way, further down the strip. We now have land, and you have now lost in a way that's irrevocable, irretrievable, and irredeemable. That is the only way to proceed. And Israelis still act like it's like 1993, and you could have some kind of, framework of understanding or negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. I don't understand why that's the case at all, but it's all part of a sort of, again, cheshbon nefesh, of a sort of real moment of introspection that Israel has yet to have.
I think it's also, I'm not going to say it's not, God forbid, a lack of patriotism, but I think that the derangement syndrome toward Bibi is so high that you have people that are actually rooting against him. Now, you might say that you don't like him personally, or even you don't like him as a prime minister, but it's a very different level when you're actually actively rooting against him. Even when Biden was president, I was still rooting for Joe Biden. I can't imagine sitting here saying I'm rooting against Joe Biden being
100%.
successful
Right.
in protecting American interests. You might disagree on where those interests are, but I think that there's that very fine line that has been broken. And there's a lot of people who are openly rooting against him.
To tie it back to our conversation earlier today, I'm sitting here about 4 blocks from a very, very, very large conservative synagogue that first omitted and then radically altered the prayer for the state of Israel, because God forbid we will pray for a bad man like Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a complete corruption of the soul, the brain, and the heart.
Correct. And I'll just add, going to the military advocate general, I know I actually spoke to people in the circle of this soldier. But I know there was someone on October 7th who actually was one-on-one with a Nukhba terrorist and made the decision essentially in a, I'll say combat, right? You're one-on-one with Nukhba terrorists to kill him. And he was actually detained and investigated if he used or abused power and force.
Right. Because
This is just
that's an important question to
yes.
to
He's
investigate.
he's supposed to detain this terrorist and then I don't know, ask him a series of questions: why he was there, what's he planning on doing. Maybe he could drag him with him for a mile as he's trying to walk. I mean, obscene, right? But that's kind of the attitude that was going on, and I think a lot of that is just trying to appease Israel's enemies or kind of the greater UN allegations, right? Just because someone like Max Blumenthal writes something doesn't mean it's true.
I mean,
But
look,
unfortunately,
this is a reality that became very evident to me the first day I came into IDF basic training and was taught. I think it was actually the second day that we were taught the sort of Ha'ot Bichabesh, the sort of open fire instructions, which were sort of like, first of all, you have to shout, then you shout a little bit louder, then you say stop or I'll shoot, then you shoot in the air, then you aim to defeat. I was like, guys, like this sequence is taking about 38 minutes. If someone is running at me with a knife, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna shoot that person so that person doesn't kill me, because in my mind, that's war. The whole ethos is totally thwarted it, and this is not, God forbid, to issue some kind of call to bloodlust and barbarism, the likes of which there simply has not been in the IDF, and we now have 70 odd years of documented history. Yes, there are cases in every group of people here and there. You could say, oh, look at that one kind of aberration, but those are exceptions to the rule that teach you more about the rule than anything else. I think this whole army needs to have a real kind of moment of reckoning, and sadly, that is not a moment of reckoning that will ever come unless the prime minister, but by a larger extension, I think the people of Israel demand that we stop and understand, hey, not just why we didn't have the supplies that we needed on October
Right.
7th, not just why the Minister of Ministry of Defense sort of papered over the whole thing, but why aren't we willing to go ahead and fight wars to win? Why do we have an IDF that at the, say, colonel and above level looks at conflict resolution the way they do through the Wexner Fund trained, Harvard intellectuals, and not as human beings have looked at conflict at war since time immemorial, which is war is about killing your enemy and taking their land. That's it.
And it's also I have mixed feelings now about Dan Senor's book, Startup Nation, because on some hands you see this incredible innovation and you see people willing to push the envelope, and then you go and you turn to the army, and within the system, it's so much the opposite of that. And you have people that are basically stuck saying, I'm going to listen. I have to listen to exactly what's going on. I can't deviate one way or the other when it comes to how I'm allowed to think, how I'm allowed to talk, how I'm allowed to actually push forward ideas. If you go outside the ideas like Ofer Winter, you're kicked out. If you push within the army like Chazi Nechama, you're kicked out. And I wish that some of that spirit would actually come back. I think it's very much, like you're saying, it's like anti-Wexner Foundation. And I saw that nothing was more evident than people that were literally denying donations for a long time because they said, we can't take donations. I'm like, okay, I don't care what your rule says. Can you please actually just open your eyes and say, what's going to keep my men safe? And it wasn't an automatic yes to every single commander. And I also think that when we talk about Israel's willingness to win, it also doing what it takes to win. People, the refrain in the last 6 months to 8 months, oh, we're so tired. Well, yeah, you're going to be tired when you let terror armies build on your border for 2 decades, and then you have to fight them because they stole your people and you have to go back. Yeah, I imagine you're pretty tired.
Not just that, when you have a lawyer telling you, well, you've exercised too much force in killing the person who raped a 14-year-old 3 minutes earlier. You're going to be a whole different kind of tired. You're going to be exhausted. But you mentioned Ofer Winter and sort of this conversation with the idea of, I think it goes, even maybe a little bit deeper than that. Yes, Startup Nation was very true, perhaps for some corners of the army. It is not a coincidence that the corners of the army currently seems to prioritize are the Air Force, commandos and Unit 8200, sort of cyber security, etc. These are, shall we say, corners of the army that are traditionally and still very much governed by a very specific type of person, a type of person that then leaves and starts a high-tech, as they say in Hebrew, high-tech company, and then could be found on Saturday night on Kaplan Street protesting against the government. The people who usually go to, infantry brigades, of course, this is a huge kind of generalization, but those are people who look like us, Dana. Those are people in beards and yarmulkes who are there to run with a
Right.
gun and shoot people in the field. There has not been a chief of staff coming from those corners in a very long time. There's not been an IDF leadership coming from those corners in a very long time. And there's not been an IDF sort of overall priority to actual traditional warfighting in a very long time. Don't worry, we have the cyber. The cyber will keep the fence, $1 billion fence, very secure. No one with a cutter and a pickup truck could ever go through the fence. Dudes, look at this. This happened because you were wrong about everything you said. And instead of saying, okay, we need a real kind of re-challenging of everything that we saw, they're saying, well, no. It's very important that we keep that, which you see in the sort of, the latest scandal that we just discussed with the IDF.
But it gets even worse, I'll say, or even deeper.
Always does.
In the sense that it's not even just the IDF, it's what society prioritizes.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially setting it up where if you're smart, you're going to go to these units. If you're gifted, you're going to go to these units.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a dumbass, you're going there. And therefore, who is more intellectually capable? The people who are going to 8200 or going to these other things. And then if you're really dumb, where are you going? You're going to be in logistics. So therefore, you're actually creating a hierarchy in which anyone who wants to speak up is immediately basically dismissed, because who are you? Like, could you even graduate from university? That's just it's this way of thinking which infects the mind.
Also, it's not like the army needs logistics or anything. That's totally.
No. So again, I mean, can you imagine, by the way, I said this throughout the whole intense part of the war. Can you imagine any other country? Imagine like Iraq. America's going to Iraq. They're like, okay, who wants to go with us so we can barbecue for the soldiers so they can get hot food? Because otherwise they'd have nothing to eat.
Right.
They're like, what world are we living in? Like, this is crazy. The only way they can get a sandwich is if the mom and dad drive down, 25 miles from Tel Aviv to go. Nuts. But I think that as a society, there has to be room for understanding that there are different perspectives and people can offer ideas that might not be Ivy League. They might not be Ivy League educated or fit that Technion mold, but they still have something to add to it, and they're going to be prioritized as.
Sadly, Israel is not that society at this minute, and I think you could see it. And now I feel like you and I have not touched enough third rails in the course of this conversation. I want something very provocative, and so I think you see it, perhaps more clearly than anything, in the mistreatment of our Haredi brothers, who are considered this kind of subhuman and totally at fault for sort of not serving in the army, and are spoken of in rhetorical terms that would not have been unfamiliar to any sort of budding Nazi in the early 1930s. Now, it's a very complicated issue. You could hold whatever opinion you want about whether or not everyone should serve in the army and what the actual needs of the army and of society are, et cetera, et cetera. But to immediately embark on this campaign that assumes, hey, you are subhuman, you have no value to us because you made that choice, I think it's very indicative of a lot of challenges that Israeli society now must grapple with.
I mean, you also have the religion of Zionism. If you want to talk about a super third rail, right? I understand if you're coming from these Haredi communities, why you would not want to subscribe to the religion of Zionism.
Same.
And that's not, again, this is a much deeper conversation. You and I could sit here for 12 hours. We wouldn't even have enough time. And this is not saying that I hate the trolls, so they always immediately pop in, oh my God, or you don't like the state of Israel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you're coming from the Haredi background and you believe that there's Torah dictates, and all of a sudden you're asking them to go into a secular society that by its own admission and what they prioritize is multicultural, they are not going to want to do that. And it's not saying, hey, you have to do this because my kid has to die and your kid has to die. That's not really an answer. There's a question about should people participate in a civic experiment for the state, right? If you took Judaism out of the state of Israel and you said, we're surrounded on all sides and they want to kill us, we need as many men as possible, that's a very different discussion. But what's going on now is actually there is a portion of the people that are insisting on Haredim joining the army that are also waging a war on Torah. So being able to separate those ideas are important.
I think that's very true, and again, it's indicative of a much larger and much more interesting discussion. Israel, in many very real ways, is having precisely the same conversation that Zionism has had from its very inception. Israel sort of had a sort of brief break of 70 odd years because it needed to fight for its actual survival. It needed to ensure that it could continue to exist. But now we're back to the point, thank God, that we could continue to have the sort of foundational discussions about what type of society do we want to be? Do we want to be a Jewish state, or do we want to be a state for the Jews? There are a lot of people, myself included, for whom Zionism makes absolutely no sense unless it is rooted deeply and firmly in this messianic yearning that we express 3 times daily when we daven, of, fulfilling the divine promise of, Mashiach coming, of Bet HaMikdash being rebuilt, etc., etc. That is the true essence of Zionism. And historically, I would argue that it's this kind of, again, big Mashiach energy that made it possible for so many people with such contradictory ideas like, socialist Zionism, cultural Zionism, liberal Zionism, revisionist Zionism to come together, though they didn't agree on pretty much anything else, and be part of the same umbrella. But there are a lot of people, and you said it, very well in your introduction, for whom this is basically a state. The most important thing is the Israeliness of it all. Judaism is, shall we say, wallpaper, or an ornament, or some kind of nostalgic inheritance that we got from grandma and that we keep, somewhere in the cupboard because it's not too cool. And if that's your worldview, well, that's a very different proposition to convince your fellow Israelis of. And I think everything that we're seeing in Israel, the Kaplan Street demonstration, the sort of political turmoil, etc., comes back to this struggle. And I think Israelis would have no choice in the coming, years, if not months, than to finally have this conversation head on.
Do you think that they're capable of having it? And I don't want to be patronizing. I don't mean to say. I mean, how do you possibly have that discussion when you're simultaneously kind of focused on real government issues? Like, you're about to go into an election year in Israel. How do they possibly talk about these big consequential ideas when there's so much short-term politicking that's going on?
Well, I think it's precisely because the short-term politicking has gotten them precisely nowhere that they're increasingly understanding that the divides are not about Bibi yes or no. I mean, it's so ridiculous to look at the Israeli political system, because if you try to sort of tease out real differences in ideology or even policy about anything, they literally don't exist. It's literally all one flavor of the same, so variations on the same flavor on the same theme. It comes down to this one big question: Bibi or never Bibi. It is so incredibly stupid and petty, and I think most Israelis are increasingly tired of it, and most Israelis are also looking at the total inconsistencies. Look, the so-called Kaplan Street protest, right, started a year and a half before the judicial reform. It started when Ehud Barak, the former prime minister and arguably the most kind of, wildly corrupt and Machiavellian person in Israeli society, started something called Mechat Adgalim Ashchorim, the Black Flag protest, because Bibi was a fascist. Then it evolved into, or devolved, depending on your worldview, into crime minister. Very clever pun. Not prime minister, crime minister. Why? Because Bibi is corrupt. Then came the quote-unquote judicial reform, and though none of the people who claim to have opposed it actually bothered reading it or know anything about it, it was about, judicial reform and democracy. Then came the war, and all this operation, again, with few exceptions, there were a lot of very well-meaning people who tried to do real good work, but the movement, as movement at large, then basically said, oh, no, now we want to pressure the government to stop the war and bring the hostages home, because the person who's really endangering the lives of the hostages, it's not Hamas, it's Bibi. Now the war is over. They're looking for a new excuse. At some point, Israelis, I think, are looking at this and saying, wait a minute. It's not about any of these things. It's not even about Bibi. It's really about what you imagine the future of the country to be. If you imagine the future of the country to be Berlin or New York or Paris with a Hebrew accent and, again, a very light schmear of nostalgic Yiddishkeit, that's one thing. If you're interested in a country that is actually truly a profoundly Jewish state, by which I do not, of course, mean to say we're bringing back the Sanhedrin and we're having some Jewish version of Sharia law. Anyone who studies Gemara knows that that's nonsense. But a country whose main kind of emotional, intellectual, spiritual interests are kind of doubling down on Jewish life, on Jewish existence, on Jewish ideas, and a Jewish way of being in the world. That's very different. I think the majority of Israelis want what's behind door number 2, but I think sadly a vast majority of the Israeli elites, including a lot of people with many rights who fought for this country, who built this country, who invested in this country, who made it something wonderful, they want door number 1. That clash is the clash we're seeing. Israelis simply have no choice but to resolve it, and resolve it soon.
I completely agree with you. I'll add that when I was talking to someone very high up in the hostage forum in America, they actually said to me that they trusted Sinwar more than they trusted Bibi, because they knew what Sinwar wants, and we don't know what Bibi wants. And I just remember almost spitting out my beer, saying, "What? Like, did you really just say that?" And they said, No, I'm not saying I support terrorism. I'm saying that he's clear with his intentions." It's like, something is seriously wrong if this is where we're
By the way,
are
I think among that Israeli milieu, I don't think this would be considered a controversial statement.
No, you know how I know it wasn't a controversial statement? Because they said it in front of me with other people.
Yeah.
They didn't know my politics, because I, as someone who just cares about fellow human beings, was trying to help as many people as I could when it came to hostage families or soldiers, whatever it might be. So I was there with someone of whom I don't agree with anything, but I was just sitting there, and that's what they said. Now, would they have said that if they knew my politics? Probably not. But they said it thinking, oh, we're just around like-minded individuals. So, okay, what's the big deal? And it's a window into how we are in the situation that we're in. And that's not to discount their commitment to Israel on a human emotional level, but there's something that's very much disconnected when it comes to what you and I and many others would see as the correct path, as you said, door number 2 for Israel versus door number 1. Before I let you go here, do you think we get to a phase? Do you think we get to a phase 2 of the ceasefire?
I think we're in it. I think sadly, I say this with a sense of tremendous deflation here, but I think if you look at Gaza a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, I think you're going to see some version of what we have right now. Do we get to something that looks like the phase 2 on paper? Of course not, because phase 2 on paper is predicated on absolutely absurd notions. Hamas must disarm. Cool. Who's doing the disarming? We need an international force. Cool. Are you now going to convince Egyptian soldiers to be the ones who tell their brothers from across the divide, like, put down your gun or I'll shoot you? Are you going to have an Israeli army that understands that with the presence of Egyptian peacekeepers, it still has some freedom of operation? Because God forbid a stray bullet or a stray bomb will kill one of those Egyptian peacekeepers, and then you have a diplomatic crisis. There are so many kind of logical fallacies or near impossibilities built into the very framework of this thing, with apologies, to the men and women in the State Department and in the administration who worked very hard and sincerely to really bring it to life. I think stage 1 was perfectly clear and perfectly understandable. Even those who had issues with the costs Israel had to pay, I think were ecstatic to see the living hostages and increasingly also most of the dead hostages be all come back home. But I think if you look at Gaza a year from now, you're going to see, again, some quibble on who controls what, some demand for short-term this, that, or the other. Because also, not only is the framework not ready, but I think if you look at what you're actually working with, Palestinian society, to the extent that just such a thing exists, has been kind of feeding at the trough of international corrupt organizations for decades now.
Well, that is Palestinianism by
That's all it
definition.
is. Correct.
Right.
It's just a con. And so to expect anyone to say, okay, well, I'm going to develop, a strip mall in the Gaza Strip. I'm going to build a nice hotel. I'm going to do something for my people. None of that is going to happen. None of that matters. It's going to be a catastrophe. You're going to fight this war again. Hopefully, Israel would have sort of wisened up by then. But I have very little hope that we would see something true and meaningful flourish from phase 2 of this agreement.
I'm being slightly facetious, but I think that Qatar should just be the sole controllers of this area. You want to play both sides, you go figure it out. You put your men out there to go die. Great. You guys are in charge. Give us all the bodies back. You want to go sit there and play both sides and fund it and do everything and stream Al Jazeera. You can give out Al Jazeera iPads, but it's your mess. You figure it out. And if you don't want to pressure Hamas properly, if you don't want to take in more humanitarian cases as they claim on Al Jazeera, then you figure it out. Look, that's my
if we're being
slightly
facetious,
radical idea.
If we're being facetious, I see you and I raise you. Our good friend, the light unto the nations, Steve Bannon, argued the other day, I'm sure you saw it, that it should be not a 2-state solution, but a 3-state solution, because we need a separate Christian state. That's exactly what the region needs, another minority state. You know what, Steve? Great. Your Christian state is in Gaza. You're in charge. Go ahead. Have fun.
Did you see Marjorie Taylor Greene on Bill Maher? She said that she was not aware that the Rothschilds was associated with Jews until she entered the Congress.
We're governed by some of the best.
Absolutely. Liel, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Hope we could do it again.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.